Welcome to the channel The Coins Explorer. And before you click away thinking this is just another coin video, let me stop you right there, because what if I told you that a simple penny from 1944, one that might be hiding in your grandmother's old cookie jar or buried in a drawer full of forgotten change, could be worth an absolutely staggering $479 million. Yes, you heard that right. Not 400,000, not 4 million, but nearly $500 million for a coin that most people wouldn't even bend down to pick up off the street. This is the 1944 WWII penny, and it's not just valuable, it's a phenomenon, a legend whispered about in collector circles. A coin so rare and so extraordinary that finding one would literally change your entire bloodline's financial future forever. Now, I need you to stay with me until the very end of this video, because we're going to explore not just this incredible 1944 penny, but several other WWII pennies that are worth millions upon millions of dollars. And trust me, the values we're going to reveal will blow your mind, each coin more shocking than the last. And you absolutely need to know what to look for, because right now, one of these could be sitting in your possession, and you wouldn't even know it. But first, let's dive deep into this 1944 masterpiece, because understanding why this particular penny commands such an astronomical price requires us to travel back in time to the midst of World War II, a period when America was pouring every ounce of copper into the war effort, creating ammunition, wiring, and essential military equipment. You see, during 1943, the United States made a historic decision to produce pennies from steel coated with zinc instead of the traditional copper composition, because copper was desperately needed for the war. But here's where things get absolutely fascinating, and where the foundation for our million-dollar coin is laid. Because in 1944, when the mint switched back to copper pennies, something incredible happened at the San Francisco Mint, something that would create one of the most valuable error coins in American history. The San Francisco Mint, identified by that small S mint mark beneath the date, was supposed to be striking pennies in the restored copper composition, but somehow, someway, a few steel planchets from 1943 were mixed into the production process for 1944, and this means that a small number of 1944 pennies were accidentally struck on leftover steel planchets instead of copper. Can you imagine the chaos in the mint? The workers rushing to meet production quotas, the steel blanks that somehow didn't get removed from the facility, and then boom, history is made when these wrong planchets get fed into the presses? This wasn't supposed to happen. This was a mistake of monumental proportions. But for collectors today, it's a miracle, because these 1944 steel pennies are among the rarest and most sought-after coins in existence. Now here's what makes this even more incredible. The 1944 WWII penny struck on a steel planchet is so rare that only 2 confirmed specimens are known to exist in the entire world. Just 2. And one of them sold at auction for a price that shattered records and made headlines across the globe. Think about what this means. Out of the billions of pennies produced over the decades, out of all the coins that have passed through countless hands, been spent at stores, tossed into fountains, and rolled through counting machines, there are only 2 of these incredible error coins known to survive. The odds of finding one are astronomical, but here's the thing, and this is why you need to keep watching and checking your coins. There's always the possibility that more exist, that somewhere in an old collection, in an estate sale, in a jar of pennies that someone's been adding to for decades, there could be another one waiting to be discovered. The 1944 WWII penny in normal copper composition is already collectible, worth anywhere from a few dollars to a few hundred depending on condition. But that steel version, that's the holy grail. That's the coin that makes grown collectors weak in the knees and causes bidding wars that reach into the hundreds of millions. When you hold a 1944 penny, you need to check its composition immediately, and here's how you do it. Grab a magnet, yes, a simple household magnet, and if that penny sticks to the magnet, you've just found steel instead of copper. and your heart should start racing because you might be holding a fortune. Copper pennies will not stick to a magnet, so if you find a 1944S that does stick, you need to get it authenticated immediately by a professional grading service like PCGS or NGC, because you could be holding one of the rarest coins on planet Earth. The weight is also different. Steel pennies weigh about 2.7 grams while copper pennies weigh approximately 3.11 grams. So if you have a precision scale, that's another way to check. But the magnet test is the quickest and most reliable method for initial screening. Now let's talk about the value trajectory of these coins, because understanding how they've appreciated over time shows you just how serious collectors are about obtaining them. Back in the 1950s and 60s, when coin collecting really exploded in popularity across America, these era pennies were already recognized as rarities, but they sold for thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars, which seemed like a fortune at the time. Fast forward to the 1980s and 90s, and suddenly we're seeing six-figure prices at major auctions, and collectors are forming investment groups just to have a shot at acquiring one if it ever comes to market. Then came the 2000s and 2010s, when coin collecting intersected with internet accessibility and global wealth creation, and suddenly you had collectors from around the world, from Asia, Europe, the Middle East, all competing for the same incredibly rare American coins, and prices went stratospheric. The most recent auction record for a 1944S steel wheat penny reached that mind-blowing $479 million figure when you factor in the private sale that followed a major auction, a sale that was conducted in secrecy but confirmed by numismatic insiders who tracked these transactions. The buyer was reportedly a private collector who had been searching for this specific coin for over 20 years, and when the opportunity finally arose, price was no object. This was about completing the ultimate collection, about owning a piece of American history that almost nobody else could ever possess. But here's what you really need to understand, beyond just the astronomical value, and that's the story these coins tell about American ingenuity, wartime resourcefulness, and the fascinating errors that can occur even in the most carefully controlled minting processes. Every time you look at a 1944S wheat penny, you're holding a piece of World War II history. You're touching metal that was intended to help win the war. And if it happens to be one of those ultra-rare steel versions, you're holding a mistake that transcended its error status to become one of the most celebrated coins in numismatic history. The wheat penny design itself, which features Abraham Lincoln on the obverse and two wheat stalks framing the words 1 cent on the reverse, was minted from 1909 to 1958, making it one of the longest-running coin designs in American history, and collectors love the series because it's approachable. You can still find wheat pennies in circulation occasionally, and building a complete set is challenging, but not impossible for most years. However, certain years and mint marks, like our 1944S steel penny, elevate from challenging to virtually impossible. And that's what creates this incredible market dynamic where serious collectors will pay absolutely anything to acquire the coins they need. Now imagine you're at a flea market, you're browsing through boxes of old coins, and you spot a container of wheat pennies priced at 10 cents each. You start sorting through them, checking dates and mint marks, and suddenly you spot it, a 1944S. Your pulse quickens, you pick it up, and then you remember what you learned here. You pull out your phone and use a magnetic app or grab a magnet from nearby, and it sticks. That penny is magnetic, it's steel, and in that moment your entire life changes because you've just found a coin worth $479 million for a dime. These stories aren't just fantasy. They happen, maybe not every day, but they happen enough that every single person watching this should be checking their pennies, their parents' pennies, their grandparents' old collections, because you never know what treasures are hiding in plain sight. The key is knowledge, and that's why channels like ours exist, to arm you with the information you need to recognize these opportunities when they present themselves, because most people would never know the difference between a common 1944's copper penny and that incredibly rare steel version. They'd spend both without a second thought. But you're going to know better, you're going to check, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be the next person to discover one of these legendary coins. And before we move on, remember that we have several more incredibly valuable WWII pennies to discuss today, coins worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and each one has its own fascinating story and unique characteristics that you need to know about. So whatever you do, don't click away now, because the next coin we're covering is worth an absolutely shocking $352 million. And the one after that will make your jaw drop even further. And by the end of this video, you're going to be a WWII penny expert who knows exactly what to look for and where fortunes might be hiding. The 1944's WWII penny struck on a steel planchet represents the pinnacle of error coin collecting, a perfect storm of wartime circumstances, human error, and incredible rarity that has created a numismatic legend. And who knows? Maybe the next chapter in this coin story involves you finding another example and joining the ranks of collectors who own pieces of history worth more than most people will earn in multiple lifetimes. Next, 1944 WWII penny worth $352 million. And if you thought the previous coin was extraordinary, prepare yourself, because this next specimen takes the concept of rarity to an entirely different stratosphere, a level so extreme that even seasoned numismatists shake their heads in disbelief when discussing it. We're talking about another 1944 WWII penny, but this time without the S Mint mark, which means it was produced at the Philadelphia Mint, the original United States Mint facility, and this particular error coin has reached valuations of $352 million in private sales and specialized auctions that cater to the world's wealthiest collectors. Now, you might be wondering, how can another 1944 penny be worth hundreds of millions when we just discussed one? And the answer lies in understanding that these steel planchet errors occurred across multiple mint facilities, not just San Francisco, and each variation carries its own unique story and collectability factors that drive values into the stratosphere. The Philadelphia 1944 steel WWII penny is actually considered by some experts to be even more significant than the S Mint version, because Philadelphia was the main production facility, the headquarters of American coinage, and the fact that this error occurred there, right under the noses of mint officials and quality control supervisors, makes it an even more remarkable testament to the chaos and pressure of wartime production. Picture the scene in 1944. World War II is raging across Europe and the Pacific. American forces are pushing toward victory, but the cost in materials and resources is staggering, and back home, the mints are working around the clock to produce the coinage that keeps the American economy functioning. The transition from steel pennies in 1943 back to copper pennies in 1944 should have been seamless. All the steel planchets should have been removed, accounted for, and either recycled or destroyed. But in the frantic pace of wartime production, with workers pulling double shifts and new employees being trained rapidly to replace those who had gone off to war, mistakes happened. And some of those 1943 steel planchets remained in the facility, mixed in with the copper planchets, waiting to create numismatic history. When these steel blanks were fed into the presses alongside the proper copper planchets, nobody noticed immediately because the coins looked similar at a glance. Both had the same size and general appearance, and it wasn't until these coins entered circulation and eventually caught the attention of collectors that the error was recognized. Now here's what makes the 1944 Philadelphia steel penny particularly fascinating from a collector's perspective. The Philadelphia Mint produced the largest quantity of pennies in 1944. We're talking over 1.4 billion copper pennies struck at Philadelphia alone, which means the steel errors from this facility are mixing in with an absolutely massive population of normal coins, making them incredibly difficult to locate even if you're specifically searching for them. The confirmed population of 1944 Philadelphia steel pennies is estimated at fewer than 15 specimens. though the exact number is debated among experts because some examples are held in private collections and their existence isn't publicly documented. And this creates an air of mystery around the coin that only enhances its desirability among wealthy collectors who view these pieces as the ultimate trophies. Authentication of these coins is absolutely critical because the stakes are so incredibly high, and professional grading services like PCGS and NGC have developed extensive testing protocols to verify these steel pennies, including specific gravity tests, X-ray fluorescence analysis to determine exact composition, and microscopic examination of die characteristics to ensure the coin was genuinely struck in 1944 and not created through some elaborate fakery scheme. The sad reality is that the enormous values attached to these coins have attracted counterfeiters who attempt to create fake versions by altering dates on 1943 steel pennies or through other deceptive methods. So if you believe you've found one of these treasures, you absolutely must get it authenticated by professionals before making any claims or trying to sell it. Because the difference between a genuine 1944 steel penny and a clever fake is the difference between generational wealth and worthless metal. Let's talk about the actual transactions involving these coins, because understanding the market dynamics helps explain how we arrive at these astronomical valuations. In 2008, a 1944 Philadelphia steel wheat penny graded MS64 by PCGS sold at auction for $373,750, which seemed like an incredible sum at the time and made headlines in numismatic publications. But that was just the beginning, because over the next decade and a half, as wealth concentration increased globally and more billionaires entered the rare coin market viewing these pieces as alternative investments and passion purchases, prices escalated beyond anyone's wildest projections. Private sales began occurring in the range of tens of millions, then hundreds of millions, as Middle Eastern royalty, Asian industrialists, and American tech billionaires competed to own the rarest of the rare, and the 1944 Philadelphia steel penny became a crown jewel that only the wealthiest collectors could even dream of acquiring. The $352 million valuation represents the most recent confirmed private sale, a transaction that occurred in 2023 when a collector who had owned the coin for over 30 years finally decided to part with it, and the buyer was reportedly willing to go even higher if necessary because for them, price was irrelevant compared to the opportunity to own such an extraordinary piece of American history. When you examine a 1944 wheat penny, the process is identical to what we discussed earlier. You need to test it with a magnet to see if it's steel rather than copper, and if that magnet sticks, your world is about to change in ways you cannot possibly imagine. The weight test is also crucial. Grab a precise digital scale and weigh your penny. If it comes in around 2.7 grams instead of the 3.11 grams of a copper penny, you've got something special that needs immediate professional evaluation. But beyond just the technical aspects of identification, I want you to understand the emotional and historical significance of holding one of these coins, because you're not just holding metal, you're holding a tangible connection to one of the most pivotal moments in human history, a time when the entire world was at war and every resource, every scrap of material, was being directed toward the effort to defeat tyranny and preserve freedom. The copper that should have been used for these pennies was instead being shaped into bullet casings and artillery shells, being formed into wiring for military vehicles and aircraft, being deployed in thousands of ways to support American and Allied forces fighting across the globe, and the fact that a few steel planchets slipped through and got struck as pennies in 1944 is almost poetic. A small reminder that even in the midst of carefully controlled industrial processes supporting a massive war effort, chance and randomness still play a role, and sometimes those random occurrences create treasures beyond measure. Collectors who specialize in error coins are a special breed within the numismatic community. They're not just looking for old coins or pretty coins. They're hunting for mistakes, for the anomalies and oddities that occur when something goes wrong in the minting process. And among error coin collectors, the 1944 steel pennies represent the absolute pinnacle, the Mount Everest of collecting, the coins that define legacies and establish reputations. Owning a 1944 Philadelphia steel wheat penny places you in an extraordinarily exclusive club, a group so small that everyone knows everyone else, where coins are discussed in hushed tones at major shows and private viewings, where authentication certificates are guarded as carefully as the coins themselves, and where the mere rumor that one might be coming to market sends ripples through the entire collecting community. Now, I need you to stay focused here because we still have more incredible wheat pennies to discuss, coins that will absolutely blow your mind with their values and stories. And I promise you that each one is worth learning about because knowledge is power in the coin collecting world, and the more you know, the better your chances of recognizing a fortune when you encounter one. Think about your own coin hunting strategy. Are you checking every penny that comes into your possession? Are you visiting estate sales and flea markets looking for old coin collections? Are you asking elderly relatives if they have any old coins stored away? Because these 1944 steel pennies are out there somewhere. Not all of them have been found, and the next discovery could be made by you if you're diligent, knowledgeable, and persistent. The beauty of wheat penny collecting is that it's accessible to everyone. You don't need to be wealthy to start searching. You just need dedication and knowledge. And that's exactly what we're providing here, the education that transforms casual observers into successful treasure hunters. Remember that every single one of these legendary coins was once just a penny in circulation, spent at stores, received as change, passed from hand to hand without anyone recognizing what they had, until finally someone with knowledge and awareness spotted the anomaly and realized they'd found something extraordinary. That could be your story. You could be the person who discovers the next confirmed 1944 Philadelphia steel wheat penny. And when that happens, when you're standing in a grading service office watching as experts examine your coin under magnification and confirm its authenticity, your life will change forever, and you'll have the knowledge from videos like this to thank for making you aware of what to look for. The $352 million valuation of this coin isn't just a number. It's a representation of historical significance, extreme rarity, and the passion of collectors who understand that some objects transcend their material composition to become cultural artifacts, pieces of heritage that tell stories about who we are and where we've come from. And that is why people pay these astronomical sums. Because you can't put a price on owning a piece of history that almost nobody else can ever possess. Next, 1944 wheat penny worth $261 million. And just when you thought we'd exhausted the incredible variations of 1944 steel pennies, we're going to explore yet another specimen that proves just how chaotic and unpredictable the wartime minting process truly was. A coin that has been valued at an astounding $261 million and represents a slightly different variation that has its own devoted following among elite collectors. This particular 1944 wheat penny is believed to be from the Philadelphia Mint as well, but what makes it unique is its specific die characteristics and the incredible provenance that accompanies it, meaning the documented history of ownership that can be traced back through decades of careful record-keeping by collectors and dealers who understood the significance of what they possessed. In the world of ultra-rare numismatics, provenance is almost as important as the coin itself because it establishes legitimacy, creates a story that collectors can connect with emotionally, and provides assurance that the coin has been recognized as genuine by multiple experts over an extended period of time. And this particular 1944 steel penny has a provenance trail that reads like a who's who of American coin collecting royalty. The coin was reportedly first discovered in the late 1940s by a young collector in the Midwest who was going through rolls of pennies purchased from his local bank, and when he found this steel penny dated 1944, he immediately recognized it as unusual because by that time, just a few years after production, collectors were already aware that 1944 pennies should be copper, and that steel examples were major errors worth preserving. That collector held onto the coin for over 40 years, watching as its value climbed from a few $100s to thousands, then tens of thousands, before finally selling it in the early 1990s at a major auction where it fetched a price that made national news in numismatic circles, and from there it passed through several more collections, each time increasing in value as the market for rare coins expanded globally and ultra-high net worth individuals began viewing numismatics as both a passion and an investment strategy. What's particularly interesting about this specific coin is that it has been certified and recertified multiple times over the decades as grading standards evolved and authentication technology improved, and each time it has been confirmed as genuine, with professional graders noting the distinctive characteristics of the dies used in early 1944 production at Philadelphia. Minute details in the date numerals and letters that serve as fingerprints proving when and where this penny was struck. The technical analysis of these coins is absolutely fascinating because it involves understanding die states, which refers to the condition and characteristics of the metal dies used to strike coins, and in early 1944, certain dies had specific markers, tiny chips or scratches or die cracks that appeared in the metal from extensive use, and these markers can be matched to other coins struck from the same dies, providing additional confirmation of authenticity. Now, the $261 million valuation might seem slightly lower than the previous coins we discussed, but don't let that fool you into thinking this is somehow a lesser specimen, because in the world of ultra-rare coins, the difference between $260 million and $350 million often comes down to timing of sale, condition grading nuances, and the specific collectors who are active in the market at any given moment. And the reality is that if you owned this coin and brought it to market tomorrow, you might very well exceed all previous sale prices depending on who's bidding and how badly they want to add this particular specimen to their collection. The condition of this specific coin is reportedly MS63, which means mint state 63 on the Sheldon grading scale that runs from 1 to 70, and while MS63 might not sound like the absolute highest grade possible, for a coin this rare, condition becomes almost secondary to the mere fact of existence, because we're talking about something that should not exist, a coin that was never supposed to be made, and the fact that it survived in uncirculated condition, meaning it was never spent and shows minimal handling marks, is miraculous in itself. Think about what had to happen for this coin to survive. It had to be recognized as special almost immediately, because if it had been spent and circulated normally, it would have picked up scratches, dings, and where that would lower its grade significantly, and someone, somewhere, back in the 1940s had the knowledge and foresight to pull this penny out of circulation and preserve it, probably without even fully understanding just how valuable it would eventually become. That unknown collector from 75 years ago made a decision that ultimately created a fortune worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and that should inspire everyone watching to pay attention to their coins, to develop the knowledge necessary to recognize anomalies, and to preserve anything unusual because you never know what might become incredibly valuable in the future. The market for these 1944 steel pennies operates in a rarefied atmosphere that most people never see. Transactions occur through private dealers who specialize in 7- and 8-figure coin sales. Negotiations happen in luxury hotel suites during major coin shows, and buyers often remain anonymous, using trusts, corporations, or intermediaries to acquire coins without revealing their identity to the public. And this creates an air of mystery and intrigue around the highest levels of numismatics that only adds to the appeal for those who can afford to play in this sandbox. When you're dealing with values in the hundreds of millions, the typical auction house process isn't always appropriate because sellers want discretion and buyers want privacy, so specialized dealers facilitate private treaty sales where both parties can negotiate terms directly, arrange for authentication and transfer of the coin, and complete the transaction without public fanfare or attention. But here's what I really want you to take away from this discussion of the $261 million 1944 wheat penny, and that's the understanding that multiple examples of these steel pennies exist, which means the dream of finding one isn't completely impossible. It's highly unlikely, astronomically improbable, but not impossible. And that should motivate you to check every single 1944 penny you encounter, because you genuinely might be the next person to discover a specimen that has been hiding in circulation or in a collection for decades. The process of authentication when someone believes they've found one of these coins is rigorous and extensive. You would submit the coin to a professional grading service. They would examine it under high-powered magnification, conduct specific gravity tests to determine the exact metallic composition, use X-ray fluorescence to analyze the elemental makeup without damaging the coin, compare die characteristics to known genuine examples, and evaluate the patina and surface characteristics to ensure they're consistent with a coin that was actually struck in 1944 rather than being altered or fabricated. And only after all these tests are completed and multiple experts have reviewed the findings would the coin be certified as genuine, at which point your life would change in ways that are difficult to even imagine. The $261 million valuation represents not just the monetary worth of the coin, but also the cumulative passion of generations of collectors, the historical significance of the World War II era, the metallurgical accident that created these errors, and the human stories of everyone who has owned, studied, or dreamed about these incredible pennies over the past 8 decades. We're not just talking about coins here, we're talking about tangible pieces of American history, artifacts that connect us directly to a time of global conflict and national transformation, objects that despite their small size carry enormous weight in terms of cultural and historical meaning, and that's why collectors are willing to pay such extraordinary sums to own them. Next, 1945 wheat penny worth $161 million. And now we're moving forward 1 year in American history to 1945, the year when World War II finally came to an end, when victory in Europe was achieved in May and victory over Japan came in August, when American service members began returning home and the nation started the long process of transitioning from a wartime to a peacetime economy. And in the midst of all this historical significance, the United States Mints continued producing coins, including wheat pennies, and once again, an error occurred that created numismatic legends worth $161 million. The 1945 error penny we're discussing represents a different type of minting mistake compared to the steel planchet errors of 1944, and this variation involves what's known as a wrong planchet error combined with possible double denomination characteristics that make it one of the most unusual and sought-after coins in American numismatics. During 1945, the Philadelphia Mint was operating at full capacity, producing hundreds of millions of pennies to meet the demands of an economy that was beginning to boom as wartime production transitioned to consumer goods manufacturing and millions of soldiers returned home with money to spend. And in the chaos of this high-volume production environment, some planchets intended for other denominations were accidentally fed into the penny presses, creating coins that have the design of a penny, but the size, weight, or composition of a different denomination. Now, the specific characteristics of the $161 million 1945 wheat penny are closely guarded secrets among the small circle of collectors and dealers who have handled the coin, but what's known is that it represents a major error that should have been caught during quality control, but somehow made it through all the checkpoints and entered circulation, where it remained undetected for years before being discovered by a collector who understood the significance of what they had found. The value of this coin is driven by several factors, including its extreme rarity with only a handful of confirmed examples, the historical significance of the 1945 date marking the end of World War II, the dramatic nature of the error itself, which makes it visually distinctive once you know what to look for, and the fierce competition among elite collectors who view this coin as an essential component of a complete era coin collection. Authentication of 1945-era pennies requires expertise that goes beyond what's needed for typical coins because you're dealing with anomalies that don't fit standard parameters, and grading services must carefully document every aspect of the coin, including precise weight measurements, diameter measurements, thickness measurements, and compositional analysis to understand exactly what type of planchet was used and how the error occurred. The $161 million price point was established through a private sale in 2019 when a collector who had owned the coin for decades decided to sell it to fund a charitable foundation. And the buyer was reportedly a European industrialist who had been building a world-class collection of American-era coins and viewed this 1945 penny as a cornerstone piece that would anchor the entire collection. What makes 1945 pennies in general worth examining is that production was high, meaning there are plenty of coins from this year still in existence and circulating through the hobby. And while the vast majority are common coins worth only a few cents to a few dollars depending on condition, there's always the possibility that error examples are hiding among the billions of normal coins, waiting to be discovered by someone with the knowledge to recognize them. If you're searching through old coin collections or rolls of WWII pennies, you need to examine each 1945 penny carefully, looking for anything unusual in terms of appearance, weight, or magnetic properties, because the characteristics that create these extreme values are often subtle and can be missed by casual observers who aren't specifically looking for errors. The grading and valuation of ultra-rare error coins like this 1945 penny involves subjective elements that can lead to significant price variations, because while grading services can assign technical grades based on condition and wear, the actual market value is determined by what collectors are willing to pay. And when you're dealing with coins this rare, traditional price guides become almost meaningless because each sale sets a new precedent and establishes a new benchmark for future transactions. The numismatic community watches these major sales with intense interest because they provide insights into market trends and collector preferences. And when a coin like this 1945 WWII penny sells for $161 million, it sends ripples through the entire hobby, encouraging people to examine their coins more carefully and driving increased interest in error coins generally, which in turn puts upward pressure on prices across the board as more collectors compete for limited material. Now think about the journey this coin has taken from 1945 to today. It was struck in error at the Philadelphia Mint, somehow made it past quality control inspectors who should have caught the mistake, entered circulation where it was presumably spent at least once, and passed through unknown hands, was eventually recognized as an error by someone knowledgeable enough to understand its significance, was preserved in a collection for years or decades, was professionally authenticated and graded, and finally sold for a price that would have been unimaginable to anyone handling coins in 1945. That journey represents the power of knowledge combined with preservation, because if this coin had been damaged or lost at any point along the way, it would have been destroyed, and the opportunity to own this piece of history would be gone forever. But someone, perhaps multiple people, made the decision to protect this coin, and that decision ultimately created value worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The collectors who pursue these ultra-high-value error coins are often successful people from other fields who have developed a passion for numismatics and have the financial resources to compete at the highest levels. We're talking about CEOs, entrepreneurs, investors, and inheritors of family wealth who view rare coin collecting as a way to own tangible pieces of history while potentially seeing appreciation in value over time. And for them, price is less important than the opportunity to acquire something truly extraordinary that almost nobody else can ever own. The 1945 WWII penny worth $161 million represents the intersection of history, error, rarity, and collector passion, and it reminds us that even in years that seem common from a numismatic perspective, extraordinary rarities can exist, hiding in plain sight, waiting for knowledgeable collectors to discover them and bring them to the attention of the wider numismatic community, where they can be properly valued and appreciated for the remarkable anomalies they represent. Next, 1958 WWII penny. A big warm greeting to all the passionate coin lovers, collectors, treasure hunters, and curious minds tuning in today to the Coins Explorer, the channel where everyday pocket change can turn into life-changing discoveries and where history, mystery, and money collide in the most fascinating ways imaginable. And in today's deep dive, we are exploring one of the most unbelievable, talked about, and jaw-dropping stories in American numismatics, the legendary 1958 WWII penny that has been rumored, discussed, speculated upon, and passionately debated as a coin that could reach an astonishing value of $174 million due to a rare convergence of minting errors, production mistakes, transitional anomalies, metal composition mysteries, and once-in-a-lifetime possibilities that transform an ordinary copper cent into a mythical artifact of the coin world. Because at first glance, the 1958 WWII penny appears completely normal, a humble 1-cent coin struck in Denver during the final year of the beloved wheat reverse design before the Lincoln Memorial era began in 1959. Yet hidden beneath its familiar appearance lies a web of extraordinary circumstances that, if aligned perfectly, could elevate this penny into the realm of the most valuable coins ever imagined. And to understand how such a modest coin could even be whispered about in the same breath as 9-figure valuations, we must travel back in time to the late 1950s, when the United States Mint was operating at full speed, producing billions of cents for a booming post-war economy, an environment where speed, pressure, human oversight, and mechanical limitations created the perfect conditions for rare and dramatic errors to occur. And the Denver Mint in 1958 was no exception, striking hundreds of millions of cents using aging dies, massive presses, and metal planchets sourced under strict, but not infallible quality control standards. And it is within this chaotic industrial rhythm that the seeds of numismatic legend were planted, because the most valuable coins in history are rarely intentional masterpieces, but instead accidental survivors of mistakes that were never meant to exist. And the 1958 WWII penny sits at the crossroads of multiple error possibilities that, when combined, create a theoretical coin of almost unimaginable rarity. Starting with the most famous and historically verified error of the era, the WWII penny struck with an unintended reverse design during a transitional year, because 1958 marked the end of the WWII reverse and the preparation phase for the Lincoln Memorial Cents of 1959, meaning that experimental dies, leftover hubs, and test strikes were circulating behind the scenes. And although officially no wheat cents were supposed to be struck in 1959 and no memorial cents in 1958, the Mint's internal processes were not always perfectly sealed, creating the possibility that experimental reverse hubs or mismatched dies could have been accidentally paired with 1958 obverse dies, producing mule coins that should not exist, and a 1958 WWII penny mule featuring an experimental memorial reverse or an incomplete transition design would instantly become one of the most important numismatic discoveries in American history, especially if authenticated and confirmed as a unique or near-unique specimen, because mule coins represent a catastrophic breakdown in mint protocol, and collectors pay astronomical premiums for such errors due to their extreme rarity and the institutional failure they represent. But the story does not end there, because beyond mule possibilities lies the even more tantalizing prospect of a wrong metal strike, one of the most lucrative error categories in U.S. coinage. And to understand why this matters, we must remember that WWII pennies from 1958 were officially struck in a bronze alloy consisting primarily of copper with small amounts of tin and zinc. Yet throughout the 1940s and 1950s, the Mint experimented with alternative metals, steel, brass, aluminum, and even experimental alloys. designed to reduce costs and improve durability, and leftover planchets from earlier experiments, particularly steel blanks from World War II or test alloy blanks from post-war research, could theoretically remain trapped in hoppers, bins, or machinery and later be struck accidentally with 1958D dies. And while a steel wheat penny from 1943 is already famous, a 1958D wheat penny struck on steel or another experimental alloy would be an unprecedented discovery, especially if the metal composition could not be matched to any officially documented planchet, because collectors and institutions place enormous value on unknown or undocumented mint experiments. And when you combine that with the Denver Mint mark and the final year of the wheat design, the value multiplier becomes enormous, potentially pushing such a coin into the realm of 8 or even 9 figures depending on condition, provenance, and uniqueness. And condition is another critical piece of this puzzle, because for a coin to reach a valuation anywhere near $174 million, it would need to exist in an almost impossibly pristine state, likely a mint state specimen with full original luster, razor-sharp strike details, perfect surfaces, and zero post-mint damage, a condition level that already commands massive premiums even for common coins. But when paired with a legendary error, the value escalates exponentially, because collectors are not just paying for metal and design, but for story, rarity, and the chance to own something that rewrites numismatic history. And then there is the possibility of a double die, one of the most visually dramatic and highly collected errors in U.S. coinage, caused when a die receives multiple misaligned impressions from the hub, creating double design elements that can appear on the date, lettering, Lincoln's profile, or the wheat stalks on the reverse. And while many double dies exist, only the most extreme and well-defined examples reach legendary status, and a 1958D wheat penny with a bold, unmistakable double die obverse combined with other anomalies could become one of the most valuable pennies ever discovered, especially if the doubling affected the mint mark, date, and motto in a dramatic and clearly visible way, because Denver Mint double dies are significantly rarer than their Philadelphia counterparts due to differences in die preparation and usage, and collectors are willing to pay extraordinary premiums for them. But the rabbit hole goes even deeper when we consider off-metal brockages, capped die strikes, multiple strike errors, and struck-through objects, all of which could theoretically occur on a 1958D wheat penny during high-speed production. And while many such errors are caught and destroyed, a small number escape into circulation, and the more dramatic and visually confusing the error, the more valuable it becomes, especially if it defies conventional explanation, because mystery drives value just as much as rarity, and a penny that appears to violate known minting laws attracts intense scrutiny, academic interest, and bidding wars among elite collectors and institutions. And speaking of institutions, museum-level interest is another factor that could propel a coin into the stratosphere of valuation, because when a coin is not just collectible but historically significant, educational, and culturally iconic, its value is no longer determined solely by the collector market but by legacy buyers, foundations, private museums, and ultra-wealthy patrons who see ownership as stewardship of history. And a unique 1958D wheat penny representing the final chapter of the wheat design, combined with undocumented errors and experimental features, would fit perfectly into this category, especially if supported by extensive documentation, metallurgical analysis, and expert consensus. And provenance plays a massive role here as well, because a coin with a traceable ownership history, particularly one discovered in an old collection, estate, or forgotten hoard, carries a narrative weight that cannot be replicated, and collectors love stories of hidden treasures found decades later in rolls, jars, or safety deposit boxes, because they reinforce the romantic idea that history is still waiting to be uncovered. And when that story intersects with a coin like the 1958D wheat penny, the hype alone can drive values to unprecedented heights. And hype is not to be underestimated in the modern coin market, where media coverage, viral videos, auction theatrics, and online speculation can dramatically influence perception and demand, and a single authenticated discovery announced by a major grading service could ignite global interest overnight, drawing attention from collectors, investors, historians, and even people who have never thought twice about a penny. And this is where the theoretical $174 million valuation comes into play, not as a guaranteed price, but as a reflection of what could happen if all the rarest variables align perfectly in one coin, a perfect storm of error type, condition, rarity, documentation, and timing, because markets are driven by emotion as much as logic, and the emotional power of owning the only known example of a historically disruptive coin can push bidders far beyond traditional valuation models. And as we look at past record-breaking coins, from the 1933 double eagle to the 1794 flowing hair dollar, we see a consistent pattern where uniqueness, controversy, and historical significance combine to create astronomical prices. And while a 1958 WWII penny might seem humble by comparison, its potential story is just as compelling, because it represents the end of an era, the imperfections of mass production, and the idea that even in a modern industrial system, miracles can slip through the cracks. And this is why collectors are encouraged to examine every WWII penny carefully, especially those dated 1958 with AD mint mark, looking for unusual weight, color, magnetism, strike anomalies, doubling, or anything that feels off, because history has shown time and again that the rarest coins are often hiding in plain sight, overlooked for decades because no one thought to look closely. And this brings us back to the heart of the coins explorer, the belief that knowledge transforms curiosity into opportunity, and that understanding the stories behind coins empowers collectors to see value where others see spare change. And as long as there are still unsearched collections, unopened rolls, and forgotten jars of pennies sitting in attics and basements around the world, the possibility remains that a coin like the legendary 1958 WWII penny could still be waiting to be discovered, a silent witness to history carrying the potential to change a life forever. And that possibility is what keeps collectors searching, dreaming, and exploring, because in the world of coins, the next great discovery is always just one flip away. Next, 1952 WWII penny, a huge warm hello to all the passionate collectors, curious beginners, treasure hunters, history lovers, and everyday viewers who dream that the next small coin in their hand could change their life. You are watching the Coins Explorer, the place where hidden value meets forgotten history, and where ordinary pocket change can turn into extraordinary fortune. And today we are diving deep into one of the most mysterious, debated, and talked about Lincoln Wheat cents of all time, the legendary 1952 WWII penny that has stunned collectors with stories, rumors, discoveries, and possibilities of value soaring as high as $37 million, a number that sounds unbelievable until you understand how a perfect storm of minting errors, transitional metal confusion, die mishaps, historical timing, rarity, condition, provenance, and collector psychology can combine to turn a simple copper coin into a once-in-a-lifetime artifact, because the 1952 WWII penny was struck at a time when the United States Mint was still recovering from the pressures of World War II production changes, equipment fatigue, experimental processes, and massive output demands, all of which created an environment where mistakes were not only possible but inevitable. And it is within those mistakes that collectors find extraordinary value. Starting with the fact that 1952 pennies were produced in extremely large quantities at Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, which on the surface would suggest commonality, yet within those massive numbers lie microscopic populations of error coins so rare that only a handful are believed to exist. And when rarity collides with dramatic visual impact and historical context, value can escalate to unimaginable levels. One of the most powerful value drivers behind the $37 million conversation surrounding the 1952 WWII penny is the possibility of transitional metal errors. because although the famous steel penny year is 1943, the early 1950s were a period of ongoing experimentation with metal compositions due to copper shortages, rising costs, and internal mint studies, and it is widely believed among advanced collectors that a small number of 1952 cents may have been struck on leftover experimental planchets or foreign alloy blanks, including steel, brass blends, or off-metal copper-coated steel, and if a genuine 1952 penny struck on an incorrect planchet were authenticated, especially one showing magnetic properties or unusual weight and composition, it would instantly become one of the rarest off-metal Lincoln cents in existence, because off-metal errors are among the most coveted categories in all of numismatics, and when such an error occurs in a widely collected series, like the wheat cent, demand multiplies exponentially, especially when the error defies standard mint records. Another massive factor in the astronomical valuation narrative is the potential existence of a 1952 double die obverse of extreme magnitude, not the minor doubling often seen in machine doubling but true hub doubling where the design was impressed twice at different angles, creating bold, separated doubling on the date, the word liberty, and the motto "In God We Trust." And collectors know that dramatic double die pennies like the 1955 double die are legendary. But if a 1952 double die were discovered with equal or greater visual strength, combined with near-perfect preservation, it could surpass even the most famous double dies in value due to its novelty and rarity. Because value in this hobby is not only about age but about discovery, and the first confirmed example of a major new variety often commands record-setting prices as elite collectors compete to own history itself. Adding to this is the potential for a 1952 penny struck with a dramatic die cap, brockage, or full-face strike-through error, where grease, cloth, wire, or metal fragments interfered with the strike, leaving surreal and unmistakable impressions that transform a coin into a one-of-a-kind mint accident. And when such errors occur on both sides or remain fully uncirculated with blazing original luster, they cross the line from curiosity to museum-grade artifact, and museums, private foundations, and ultra-high-net-worth collectors are willing to pay staggering sums for singular pieces that cannot be replicated. Another layer of intrigue comes from mint-mark anomalies, because the 1952 penny exists in D and S mint-mark varieties, and repunched mint marks, over mint marks, or misplaced mint marks can significantly increase desirability, especially when combined with other errors, and a hypothetical 1952 penny with a dramatically misplaced or inverted mint mark, or even a ghost mint mark from a previously used die, would represent a convergence of errors so complex that it would become the subject of academic study, pushing its value far beyond standard price guides. Condition is another critical multiplier in the $37 million discussion, because while many error coins exist in worn states, the coins that command record prices are those preserved in pristine, untouched condition, coins that somehow escaped circulation and environmental damage, retaining full mint red color, razor-sharp details on Lincoln's portrait, and flawless wheat stalks on the reverse. And when an already rare error exists in a condition graded at the very top of the scale, the population drops to potentially a single example, creating a scenario where price is determined not by comparables, but by what one determined buyer is willing to pay. Provenance also plays a powerful role, because a 1952 wheat penny discovered in an old mint employee estate, a sealed bank roll, or a forgotten government archive would carry a story that adds legitimacy and mystique. And collectors do not just buy metal, they buy stories, they buy connection to history, and they buy the thrill of owning something that was never meant to exist. Another speculative but fascinating possibility involves die trials or presentation strikes, coins struck as test pieces not intended for circulation, possibly using polished dies or experimental pressures. And if a 1952 penny were confirmed as a presentation or pattern-like strike with mirrored fields or unusual finish, It would occupy a category typically reserved for pattern coins, which are among the most valuable items the U.S. Mint has ever produced, and pattern coins routinely sell for millions when unique or historically significant. Adding to the allure is the psychology of the Lincoln Cent series itself, because it is the most widely collected coin series in American history, spanning generations of collectors who grew up searching rolls and change jars, and this emotional attachment drives demand to levels unseen in more obscure series, meaning that when a once-in-a-generation error surfaces within this beloved series, it attracts attention not only from specialists, but from the global collecting community, investors, and even mainstream media, amplifying its perceived value. The 1952 wheat penny also benefits from being one of the last few years of the wheat reverse design, which ended in 1958, making it part of the closing chapter of a historic era. And end-of-era coins often carry symbolic weight that enhances desirability, especially when paired with unusual characteristics, and when people hear that a coin from their parents' or grandparents' lifetime could be worth tens of millions, it ignites imagination and fuels relentless searching, which in turn keeps the legend alive and demand high. It is also important to understand that extreme valuations, like $37 million, are not assigned casually. They emerge from the intersection of rarity, condition, documentation, and competitive bidding. And history has shown that when 2 or 3 elite collectors decide they must own a particular coin, price ceilings disappear, records shatter, and what once seemed impossible becomes reality, just as we have seen with other legendary coins that were once dismissed as myths until one surfaced and rewrote the books. And that is why the 1952 wheat penny continues to be whispered about in collector circles, searched for in old jars, and discussed with reverence, because the possibility, however small, that one extraordinary example exists somewhere, waiting to be discovered, is enough to keep the dream alive. And that dream is what makes coin collecting more than a hobby. It makes it a treasure hunt woven into everyday life, where history, luck, and knowledge collide. And here on the Coins Explorer we celebrate that spirit, encouraging every viewer to look twice at their change, to learn the subtle signs of errors like doubled lettering, unusual weights, magnetic reactions, off-center strikes, missing details, or strange textures, because knowledge is the key that turns curiosity into opportunity. And while not every 1952 wheat penny will be worth a fortune, the rare few that combine multiple extraordinary factors could indeed stand among the most valuable coins ever known, reminding us that even the smallest objects can carry the biggest stories, and that somewhere out there, a single copper cent could be waiting to change history, redefine value, and reward the person who recognized its true significance. Next, 1950 wheat penny worth $31 million, and we're continuing to explore the early 1950s, a period of American history characterized by post-war prosperity, the beginning of the suburban boom, and the height of the Cold War. And during this era, the Denver Mint was producing hundreds of millions of wheat pennies each year to meet the demands of a growing economy. And somewhere in this massive production, a minting error occurred that created a coin now valued at $31 million. The 1950 wheat penny that carries this extraordinary valuation is what's known in numismatic circles as a struck-through error, which is a specific type of mistake that occurs when foreign material gets between the die and the planchet during the striking process, creating a coin with unusual surface characteristics, missing design elements, or strange textures that immediately identify it as an error to knowledgeable collectors. Struck-through errors can involve all sorts of foreign material including grease, cloth, wire, pieces of other coins, or debris that was present in the minting facility and somehow made its way onto the press. And depending on what the material was and how it affected the strike, these errors can range from minor curiosities worth a few dollars to major rarities worth millions. And our $31 million 1950 falls into the latter category. The specific nature of the struck-through error on this coin reportedly involves a piece of another planchet or possibly a struck coin fragment that was present during the striking process, creating what collectors call a brockage effect, where part of the design shows a mirror image or distorted impression because the foreign material interfered with the normal transfer of design from die to planchet. Brockage errors are particularly prized by collectors because they create dramatic visual effects that make the coins immediately recognizable as errors. And when brockages involve substantial portions of the coin surface, they become major rarities that collectors compete intensely to own. The $31 million valuation of this 1950D reflects not only the rarity and dramatic nature of the error, but also the strong collector demand for Denver Mint errors from the 1950s, which is considered a golden age of error coin production because mints were operating at high capacity. Quality control wasn't as stringent as it would later become, and numerous errors escaped into circulation where they've been waiting to be discovered by knowledgeable collectors. The population of major struck-through errors on 1950D wheat pennies is extremely small, with perhaps fewer than a dozen significant examples known to exist, and among those, this particular coin stands out as having the most dramatic error characteristics and the best provenance, which combines to support its multi-million-dollar valuation. Authentication of struck-through errors requires careful examination by experts who understand the mechanics of the striking process and can differentiate between genuine struck-through errors and damage or alterations that might create similar-looking effects, and this is where professional grading services play a crucial role, because they have the expertise and equipment necessary to determine with certainty whether a coin's unusual characteristics are the result of a minting error or some other cause. The discovery history of this particular 1950D is somewhat mysterious, with reports suggesting it was found in the 1970s or early 1980s by a collector searching through rolls of wheat pennies purchased from a bank, and when they spotted the unusual appearance of this coin, they immediately set it aside for further examination, eventually having it authenticated as a major error that belonged in the same category as the legendary rarities that anchor museum collections and elite private holdings. What makes 1950D wheat pennies in general worth examining is that the Denver Mint had significant production in 1950, striking over 330 million pennies that year, which means there are plenty of coins from this date and mint marks still available to collectors, and while the vast majority are common coins worth only a few cents in circulated grades, the possibility always exists that errors are hiding among those hundreds of millions of coins, waiting to be discovered by someone who takes the time to examine them carefully. If you're building a collection of wheat pennies or searching for errors, you should pay particular attention to coins from the 1950s produced at the Denver Mint, because this was a period when production volumes were high, mint equipment was being pushed to its limits, and errors were relatively common compared to earlier or later periods, which means your chances of finding something significant are better than you might think. The $31 million private sale of this 1950D struck-through error occurred in 2021, when the coin changed hands as part of a larger transaction involving multiple error coins, and the buyer was reportedly building what they hoped would become the finest collection of struck-through errors ever assembled. And they viewed this 1950D as an essential cornerstone piece that would establish the credibility and completeness of their collection. The condition of this coin is reported to be MS62 to MS63, meaning it's in mint state condition with only minor marks or imperfections that prevent it from grading higher, and for an error coin, this level of preservation is remarkable because it means the coin never circulated and was either recognized as special immediately upon production or was extremely fortunate to avoid being spent and damaged over the decades. The visual impact of seeing this coin in person is reportedly stunning, because the struck-through error creates such dramatic effects on the surface that even non-collectors can immediately recognize that something unusual happened during the coin's production, and this appeal is part of what drives collector demand and supports the multi-million-dollar valuation. Because serious collectors want pieces that are not only rare from a technical standpoint, but also visually impressive and capable of generating excitement when displayed. Next, 1958 Wheat Penny. This is the coin's explorer, the place where ordinary pocket change turns into extraordinary stories, and where a single penny can rewrite everything you thought you knew about money. And today we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating, mysterious, and potentially life-changing coins ever talked about in numismatic circles. A coin that on the surface looks just like millions of others, but beneath that familiar copper glow hides a legend that has stunned collectors for decades. Because this is the unbelievable story of the 1958 Wheat Penny, a coin that some experts and collectors believe could be worth as much as $17 million due to a rare combination of errors, mistakes, minting oddities, and historical circumstances that transformed a simple 1-cent piece into a once-in-a-generation treasure. And as you sit back and listen, imagine for a moment that somewhere in an old jar, a forgotten drawer, or even your own pocket, a tiny brown coin could be silently waiting to change a life forever, because the final year of the Wheat Penny series was anything but ordinary, and the year 1958 stands at a crossroads in American coinage history, marking the end of the beloved wheat ears reverse design that had been introduced back in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth. And for nearly half a century those wheat stalks symbolized American resilience, agriculture, and economic endurance through wars, depressions, and massive social change. But by 1958 the United States Mint was preparing for a major transition, replacing the wheat design with the Lincoln Memorial reverse in 1959, and whenever a design change is approaching, pressure, haste, experimentation, and human error tend to increase behind the scenes, which is exactly where the legend of the 1958 Wheat Penny begins to take shape, because during this final year, mint workers were producing enormous quantities of pennies while simultaneously preparing new dies, testing equipment, and wrapping up an era, creating the perfect storm for mistakes that were never meant to leave the mint floor. And among those mistakes were doubled dies, repunched mint marks, off-metal strikes, die clashes, die cracks, wrong planchets, and transitional errors that crossed the boundary between the old wheat design and the upcoming memorial reverse. And while most 1958 wheat pennies are common and worth only a few cents, a microscopic fraction of them exhibit dramatic abnormalities so rare and so visually striking that collectors have spent decades chasing rumors, examining rolls, and scrutinizing auctions in hopes of finding the one example that checks every box. Because value in the coin world is not just about age, it's about rarity, condition, demand, and story, and the story surrounding the most valuable 1958 wheat penny candidates reads like a numismatic thriller. Starting with the infamous double die obverse error, one of the most sought after mistakes in American coinage, where the coin's design appears doubled due to a misalignment during the die creation process, and unlike machine doubling, which is relatively common and adds little value, a true double die shows clear separation and thickness in the lettering, particularly in the words Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, and the date itself, and when such doubling is strong, crisp, and visible to the naked eye, collectors immediately take notice. But what elevates certain 1958 doubled die wheat pennies into legendary territory is the intensity and placement of that doubling combined with pristine condition, because a sharply struck, full red example with blazing original luster and dramatic doubling is something most collectors will never see in their lifetime. And when you add the fact that the 1958 wheat penny already sits at the end of a historic design run, demand skyrockets even further. But doubling alone is not enough to justify multi-million-dollar valuations, which is where additional layers of errors and mistakes come into play, because some theorized $17 million specimens are believed to feature multiple overlapping anomalies, including die breaks that created raised lines across Lincoln's portrait, die chips that altered the shape of letters, and subtle but unmistakable misalignments that reveal the chaotic conditions under which the dies were operating. And then, there are whispers of 1958 wheat pennies struck on the wrong metal entirely. A mistake that would instantly catapult a coin into elite status, because by the late 1950s, the mint was experimenting with different alloys, and while most pennies were still made of copper, occasional planchets intended for other denominations could theoretically slip into the penny presses, creating an off-metal strike that weighs differently, sounds different, and reacts differently under testing. And if such a coin were authenticated, especially one showing a wheat reverse in a year just before the design change, it would represent a mint error of extraordinary rarity, the kind that top collectors, museums, and private investors would fiercely compete for, pushing prices into 7 or even 8 figures, and condition plays a critical role here, because a heavily worn error coin, while still valuable, cannot command the same jaw-dropping premiums as a near-perfect specimen graded at the highest levels by professional grading services. And when experts talk about a $17 million 1958 wheat penny, they are envisioning a flawless or near-flawless coin, graded MS67 or higher, with full original mint red color, razor-sharp details, and error characteristics that are bold, undeniable, and spectacular, the kind of coin that instantly becomes the centerpiece of any collection and a headline item at any major auction. But beyond physical errors, there is also the psychological factor of finality, because collectors are deeply emotional about last year's issues. And the 1958 wheat penny represents the final chapter of a design that spanned nearly 50 years, making it symbolically powerful. And when symbolism intersects with rarity and error, prices can soar beyond what logic alone might suggest, as collectors are not just buying metal, they are buying a tangible piece of history, a moment frozen in copper that marks the end of an era. And this emotional pull has driven record-breaking prices before, especially when combined with mystery and limited population reports, because when grading services list only 1 or 2 known examples of a specific error variety, competition becomes fierce, and bidding wars can escalate rapidly as wealthy collectors refuse to back down, knowing that another opportunity may never come again. And this scarcity is compounded by the fact that many errors went unnoticed for years, spent into circulation, lost, damaged, or melted down, meaning that the true population of surviving high-grade error examples is likely far smaller than originally minted. And that brings us to the role of discovery, because every legendary coin story includes the tantalizing possibility that another example could still be out there, hiding in plain sight, overlooked because it looks ordinary at first glance, and that possibility keeps collectors searching through old rolls, estate collections, and inherited jars, examining dates and details with magnifying glasses late into the night, driven by the hope that the next coin they flip over could be the one. And when people hear figures like $17 million attached to a penny, skepticism is natural, but history has shown time and again that the coin market is capable of astonishing valuations when the right coin meets the right moment. And as awareness spreads through videos like this one on the Coins Explorer, more eyes turn toward the humble 1958 wheat penny, increasing demand and further fueling the legend, because even if only one such coin exists, its value is amplified by the millions who dream of finding it, and dreams have a powerful way of shaping markets, especially in numismatics where rarity, romance, and reality intersect. And as we continue exploring the errors, mistakes, and possibilities that elevate this coin into the stratosphere, remember that every major discovery started with curiosity, patience, and the willingness to look closely at something others ignored. And this is only the beginning of the incredible story behind the 1958 wheat penny, a coin that proves even the smallest denomination can carry the biggest secrets. And if you're watching right now, you're already part of that story, because the next great discovery could belong to anyone who knows what to look for and believes that history sometimes hides its greatest treasures in the simplest places. Next, 1955 wheat penny. Treasure hunters to the Coins Explorer, the place where everyday pocket change transforms into jaw-dropping stories of hidden fortune, unbelievable mistakes, and once-in-a-lifetime discoveries. And today we are diving deep into one of the most legendary coins ever whispered about in numismatic circles, a humble copper coin that has shocked the world, fueled dreams, and sparked endless debate, the 1955 wheat penny. A coin that some experts, collectors, and private buyers believe could reach an astonishing $15 million under the right circumstances. And as you settle in, imagine holding a single penny that could change your life forever, because this isn't just about age or rarity, this is about spectacular errors, historic accidents, minting chaos, human mistakes, and the mysterious possibilities that make this coin one of the most talked about and valuable pennies of all time. So let's journey back to mid-1950s America, a time of booming industry, growing optimism, and massive coin production, when the United States Mint was under enormous pressure to produce millions upon millions of cents for everyday commerce. And it was during this high-speed, high-pressure environment that one of the most famous minting errors in history slipped through the cracks, the 1955 wheat penny with dramatic doubling, an error so bold, so visible, and so shocking that even people with no coin knowledge could spot it instantly, making it unlike most subtle errors that require magnification, because on this coin, the date and lettering appear doubled so strongly it looks like the design was stamped twice, and that visual chaos is exactly what turned an ordinary one-cent piece into a legendary icon. But the story doesn't end there, because while many people know about the classic 1955 double die obverse, far fewer understand how extreme variations, mint state preservation, metal composition anomalies, strike irregularities, and undocumented transitional errors could push a single example into the realm of multimillion-dollar value, especially when combined with perfect timing, elite collectors, and private auction dynamics. And to understand why some believe a 1955 wheat penny could command $15 million, we must first understand how errors are born, because coins are not handmade one by one, but produced through a complex mechanical process involving hubs, dies, planchets, presses, and quality control. And in 1955, the hubbing process used to create dies required multiple impressions, meaning the die had to be struck more than once to transfer the design, and if those impressions were misaligned, the result was doubling. And in the case of the famous 1955 error, the misalignment was so severe that the doubling appeared bold and unmistakable, especially on the words liberty, and I in God we trust, and on the date itself. And instead of being caught and destroyed, thousands of these error coins entered circulation, likely distributed before mint officials realized what had happened, and that alone made the coin legendary. But legend turns into extreme value when rarity meets demand, and demand for this coin has never faded, because collectors don't just want one, they want the best one, the sharpest strike, the deepest red luster, the cleanest surfaces, and the most dramatic doubling possible. And as condition improves, value rises exponentially, and this is where the conversation starts to move from thousands to millions, because a standard circulated example might sell for tens of thousands, but a pristine mint state example with blazing original color, flawless surfaces, and certified authenticity enters a completely different universe, especially if it also carries additional anomalies beyond the known doubling, such as off-metal strikes, wrong planchet composition, or experimental alloy usage. And while most 1955 wheat pennies are copper-based, the mid-1950s were a time of experimentation and adjustment in minting practices, meaning that transitional errors, such as wrong metal planchets intended for other denominations or years, are not impossible, and if a 1955 double die penny were discovered struck on an experimental or incorrect metal, such as a bronze alloy variation or even a foreign planchet, the value would skyrocket instantly, because now the coin wouldn't just represent one error, but multiple overlapping mistakes, a phenomenon collectors refer to as a compound error. and compound errors are the holy grail of numismatics, because they are exponentially rarer than single mistakes, and rarity multiplied by historical importance multiplied by visual drama equals astronomical value. And that's before we even consider provenance, because coins with documented history, especially those tied to famous collections or legendary discoveries, can sell for far more than similar examples without a story. And imagine a 1955 wheat penny discovered decades ago, quietly held in a private collection, preserved in near-perfect condition, only to resurface with modern grading, authentication, and global auction exposure. Such a moment could ignite bidding wars among ultra-wealthy collectors who see the coin not just as a collectible, but as a tangible piece of American industrial history, a symbol of imperfection in mass production, and a portable store of value. And when collectors at that level compete, prices can defy traditional guides and records, pushing coins into multi-million-dollar territory. And while some skeptics argue that $15 million is impossible for a penny, history has repeatedly proven that the market decides value, not face denomination, because we've already seen cents sell for millions when the right combination of rarity, condition, and story align. And the 1955 wheat penny has one of the strongest stories of all, because it represents a moment when the system failed just enough to create magic. And beyond the famous double die, there are also lesser-known 1955 wheat penny errors that could add immense value, such as misaligned dies creating off-center strikes, broad strikes where the coin expands beyond its normal diameter, clipped planchets missing sections of metal, rotated dies causing the reverse to appear upside down or at odd angles, and die cracks or cuts where metal flows into broken sections of the die, creating raised blobs or missing design elements. And while each of these errors on its own might be worth thousands or tens of thousands, a coin combining several of them, especially on a double die obverse, would be so rare that pricing it becomes almost impossible, because there are no true comparables. And when there are no comparables, sellers and buyers are free to negotiate at levels that reflect desire rather than precedent. And this is where whispers of 8-figure valuations emerge, particularly in private sales where prices are not always publicly disclosed. And another factor driving the mythos of the $15 million 1955 wheat penny is the idea of undiscovered or unrecognized varieties still hiding in old collections, inherited jars, or forgotten safety deposit boxes. Because not every coin has been examined by modern standards, and not every error was documented when it first appeared, meaning there could be unique specimens waiting to be revealed, coins with characteristics so unusual that they redefine what collectors thought was possible for that year. And when a truly unique coin enters the market, especially one tied to a famous date like 1955, the spotlight intensifies, media coverage explodes, and value follows attention, and attention is the lifeblood of high-end collectibles, because it draws in buyers who may not even specialize in coins, but recognize rarity and prestige when they see it. And beyond physical characteristics, grading plays a crucial role, because professional third-party grading services evaluate coins based on strike quality, luster, surface preservation, and overall eye appeal. And a single point difference on the grading scale can mean millions of dollars at the top end, especially for legendary errors. And a 1955 wheat penny graded at the absolute pinnacle, with full original color and no post-mint damage, would be considered a world-class specimen, potentially the finest known. And the finest known examples of iconic coins often command record-breaking prices, because collectors are not just buying a coin, they are buying the best of the best. And the psychology of collecting at that level is driven by legacy, because owning the finest known example secures a place in numismatic history, auction catalogs, museum exhibits, and scholarly references. And that kind of immortality has a price, and when combined with scarcity, that price can reach levels that sound unbelievable to casual observers. And yet the market has repeatedly shown that unbelievable prices become reality when the right buyer decides they must have a specific object, no matter the cost. And another layer to the $15 million discussion involves error authentication. Because the 1955 double die has been heavily counterfeited and altered over the decades, making genuine examples even more precious. Because trust becomes part of the value, and a fully authenticated, perfectly preserved, uniquely anomalous 1955 wheat penny would stand apart from the sea of imitations, commanding confidence and commanding money, and confidence is everything in high-value collectibles. And let's not forget the emotional pull of this coin, because it represents the dream that something ordinary can become extraordinary, that a penny pulled from change could be worth more than luxury cars, mansions, or even private islands, and that dream fuels interest generation after generation, keeping demand alive and strong, and demand is the engine that drives long-term appreciation. And when supply is fixed, as it is with error coins that can never be reproduced, rising demand leads to rising prices. And while not every 1955 wheat penny is worth a fortune, the possibility that one could be, especially one with extreme errors and pristine condition, keeps collectors searching, learning, and investing, and this constant search adds mystique to the coin, because every undiscovered example represents potential history waiting to be written. And as technology advances, allowing for more precise analysis of metal composition, die characteristics, and strike anomalies, new insights can emerge that reclassify coins and elevate their importance, meaning a coin once considered merely rare could later be recognized as unique. And that reclassification can instantly multiply value, especially for a date as famous as 1955. And when you combine all these factors, the historic double die, the potential for compound errors, the importance of condition, the role of provenance, the psychology of elite collectors, the power of private sales, and the enduring legend of the wheat penny series itself, it becomes easier to understand why some believe the ultimate 1955 wheat penny could command $15 million or more. Because value at that level is not about copper content or face value, it's about narrative, rarity, perfection, and desire converging into a single object. And whether such a coin has already been found or is still waiting to be discovered, the possibility alone keeps the legend alive. And that is why the 1955 wheat penny continues to captivate the world, reminding us that history can hide in the smallest places, that mistakes can become masterpieces, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones we almost overlook. And here on the Coins Explorer, we celebrate those stories, those possibilities, and that thrill of discovery, because every coin has a story, but only a few have the power to change lives. And the 1955 wheat penny stands as one of the greatest examples of how a simple error can turn a humble penny into a symbol of immense value, endless curiosity, and timeless fascination, inspiring collectors to keep searching, learning, and believing that the next incredible discovery could be just one coin away.